Boxing is a harsh sport where one match can easily destroy years of work and practice. Every time boxers step in the ring, they will punch and be punched, hoping to outstand their opponents. These are some of the basic strifes a boxer has, along with others, and their spirits will either thrive or cease. Although it might sound grim in these descriptions, boxing is still a sport, and is fueled by passion and love. To some, boxing is simply a way to express themselves where words cannot, and it can give inspiration and joy to many. One thing is certain though, you won't be able to maintain this occupation for long, as your body and mind can quickly deteriorate, and deciding when to quit is important. All these inner and outer conflicts are explored in the manga Ashita no Jo. A drifting delinquent arriving in a new town. This is how we first meet Jo Yabuki, our protagonist. I love the start because it's so humble and helps us understand Jo, which adds more impact to his later development. We see him at his lowest, only having a somewhat decent jacket and no money, and yet despite his conditions, he has a smile on his face. And that's because he is free. The people in this town despise Jo as he has inspired the children of the town to rebel against their parents. The only adult that sees any future for Jo is the one who has no future on his own, that being an old homeless man named Denpei. Denpei sees Jo starting fights and sees in him the potential to be a great boxer, and so he attempts to tame the wild beast that Jo is. Jo initially belittles the thought of being a boxer, mostly because of his dislike of Denpei's drunken, grandiose dream about Jo being a champion fighter, but also because of the loss of Jo's free life being traded for that of a dreamed-of future. Jo and Denpei's relationship is really energetic, as it's very much dysfunctional. Jo wants to be free, to be able to continue drifting along, with no goal other than to survive, while Denpei wants Jo to become a famous boxer so that he and Denpei can live a life of luxury and fame. Both of these aspirations are respectable, but they aren't really compatible. Although these conflicts can drive Jo and Denpei apart, they still share a lot of similarities, like both of them living as outcasts. They also come to rely on each other. Without Jo, Denpei won't be able to see his dream fulfilled, and will continue to weaken. And without Denpei, Jo will continue to age and become very much like the old drunken man that he despises, losing his freedom. But Jo's life in town and his drifting delinquency is challenged by the police and authorities, leaving him with not very much freedom. Eventually, Jo, seeing that working with Denpei will provide him more freedom than any other option, accepts the partnership. This doesn't mean they become any less dysfunctional. In fact, due to them having to interact more often, we see them lashing out frequently. This is mainly due to Jo and Denpei not really being able to understand each other and giving little respect to the other's beliefs. This dynamic drives the story so effectively, making every chapter and interaction with the two so interesting, as we get to learn more about Jo and Denpei through these conflicting dialogues, such as their histories. While Jo is usually an energetic and provoking personality, he does show some great moments of self-reflection which show how mature he can really be. And this serves to influence all of Jo's interactions with others, not just Denpei. Jo's character development isn't some 180 where he changes his mind. It's the development of Jo's sense of life and delves deeper in depth to why he lives this way. Jo is taught by Denpei to hone his fighting technique, developing from a brawler to a more orthodox boxer. But Jo still keeps his wild, animal-like brawler instincts, which is enthralling to see in a match. Jo's personality is perfectly shown in how he fights in the ring, focusing less on defense and more on attacking, getting knocked down but never surrendering, persevering through suffering just as he does outside the ring. And his development as a boxer perfectly synchronizes with his journey as a person. As he learns how to fight more elegantly, he's also able to express his ideas more eloquently. The maturation of Jo and his philosophy is one of the best parts of Ashita no Jo's story and writing. Another way the story combines Jo's inner and outer ring development is the effective use of rivals and opponents. The rivals themselves have their own philosophies which we learn about before and during matches, through both dialogues between Jo and the rivals, and their own monologues. Opponents all fight for their own reasons, whether it's seeking fame or honing their techniques. We really get to see the rivals' techniques and beliefs personified as they fight. Same with Jo. It shows us a more physical view of Jo and his rivals' beliefs. As they're forced to fight, we see how everyone deals with the harsh struggle, whether by being defensive or being more aggressive. A great example of personality shining through a boxer's moves are Jo's counters. Jo is able to use his opponent's own attacks to strengthen his own counter, much like how he persists and even grows through the hardships he experiences in life. Rivals also have dreams and aspirations past the match they face Jo in, such as becoming the champion of their weight class, which gives a real sense of weight to every fight, and not just for Jo. The matches in the manga are so powerfully drawn, with the somewhat cartoonish and charming character designs transitioning quickly into bruised and bloodied bodies, that it really emphasizes how hard everyone fights for what they believe in. There's also a powerful psychological element to fights, enhanced with the art. Through panels with only a minimal, black background, we get to see the isolated faces of fighters who are completely demoralized and filled with dread. We aren't distracted by the usual boxing ring or crowds cheering in the backgrounds. We are left with only the true, unmasked feelings of a boxer. It helps put an emphasis on how serious boxing can be, how dangerous and dreadful fighting in the ring is sometimes. We truly get to empathize with the boxers in these more stripped down panels, as there's nothing to focus on other than the confused faces of our characters. The cheering crowds also help visualize how unforgiving boxing can be. They'll cheer for the winners, but just as easily abandon their faith and love of the boxers when they make a few mistakes. All of these unforgiving factors help paint a picture of the uphill battle that a career in boxing is. But that's what helps strengthen Joe's journey as a boxer. Joe's not fighting for the crowds or fame. He boxes because it allows him to live his life. There are times where Joe and the crowd's interests line up when Joe does well, and there are times where it's beneficial for him to be a more orthodox fighter. But he's not trying to be a perfect boxer. Joe is striving to be the perfect fighter, as that's what he's always been, and that's what gives him the freedom to live perfectly in the present. He's not fighting and risking his body for people's respect or idolization, nor does he do it for the eventual wealth a boxer can accumulate. He fights to survive. He fights to live, to battle, and to converse with these excellent fighters who are risking their lives as much as Joe. This is what gives Joe a sense of direction in life, and not a job given to him by someone else. He's forged his own life with the help of Denpei and his friends, but at times, he's left to walk this path alone. We see numerous arguments between Joe and his friends on why he risks his life for boxing. These arguments are validated as well as we are shown how boxing can destroy people's lives throughout the story. We see how Joe could quit while he's in good shape and live a normal life. But Joe doesn't answer these arguments purely with words. He answers them in the ring as he fights. Through all these matches and conversations, we learn more and more about Joe's philosophy, the pitfalls and self-destructiveness of it, but also the validity to it. In the beginning, I pitied Joe, as he had a rough life, You feel bad for him. But by the end of the story, as his dreams and ideas are matured, I respected Joe. I think Joe really is a perfect character of youth. Another thing that increases my love for this manga is the art. The art in every way helps express all these emotions our characters feel through several techniques, like the misty, undefined backgrounds that help show confusion, or the calmer backgrounds that allow for introspection. These not only embed brutality, but also create beauty. The art really exemplifies Joe's development as you see him age gradually over time. This aging is done exceedingly well. You might not even notice the full change until you go back to the first few chapters. It's not like a young and old character design that changes in a time skip, as there aren't really any time skips. It's just a gradient from his younger self to his more mature adult self. It makes his character progression feel even more powerful, as this aging provides a visual maturing in Joe. The art also helps feed into the tone as well, like the oppressive noise of the crowds. It really goes to show how quick a leading spirit can dwindle in a few mistakes. It gives a real surrounding feeling to the matches, almost like there's no escape for our fighters other than to box, which really intensify things. The desperation and lack of energies our boxers have also show up in how they fight, starting to become more slurred in their movements and having a harder time standing up, further bringing along the feeling of a real struggle happening. The fun character designs, the scenic beauties found in an industrial city, the setting of a developing town with poor locals who support Joe, all the art and designs help flesh out this world more and more. The transformation from the beaten down gym to a more refined facility is also a nice evolution in the series, especially how it reflects in Joe's development. People age, not only in dialogue, but also in their appearances and designs. The occasional spreads that matches have also bring a great emphasis on the brutal punches, as the art gets noticeably grittier with textures and bolder outlines making fighters look like statues. The textures also really help add a depth to the backgrounds and movements, especially how it adds emphasis to the motion of a punch. It really can't be understated. There are also a lot of close-ups of characters' faces, which distort in such an intense way, really highlighting the true despair that they found themselves in. The art makes Ashita no Joe such a great experience to read. My conclusion, give Ashita no Joe a read. While it is 50 years old, it has had so much influence on its genre and the medium of manga alone that it's really enjoyable, and not much of a boring and basic shonen. It tells the story of a somewhat typical youth that develops into an iconic and matured, multifaceted character. Joe Yabuki is probably my favorite protagonist in any manga. Any. Like, I've read a lot of them, so, anyways. And his influence and use in the story is perfect. It really is thought-provoking, seeing Joe live. While the story can be a bit directionless in the beginning, it still introduces us to some great characters that are even more effective in the further structured plot afterwards. The boxing setup leads to some great conflicts, both physical but also introspective for our characters. The art, character designs, backgrounds, everything is gorgeous. To me, this manga is pretty much perfect. And the final fight in the final section, the last 2 volumes, is really just... like, it really is peak. This is 10 out of 10. This is undeniably one of the best mangas I've ever read. And it's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece. It's a classic. What can I say? It's the best manga ever. Well, I don't know. It's just really good.